Hey, this is Dave DeCamp from antiwar.com. This is anti-war news for Wednesday, February 21st, 2024. All right, the first story at the top of antiwar.com today. Israel is working to cut the Gaza Strip into two. So Israel is demolishing buildings to build a road through central Gaza that will cut the strip in two, demonstrating Israel's long-term plans to occupy the territory. So Israel's Channel 14 reported on this road, which is being built in an area known as the Net Zarim Corridor. And this new road, known as Highway 749, will separate Gaza City from the rest of the strip. Israel is creating a 1 kilometer buffer zone to the north and to the south of the road. So it's going to be 2 kilometers wide, which is similar to this zone that they're also creating along the entire Israel-Gaza border. That's 1 kilometer inside of Gaza from the Israeli border. They're demolishing everything that's there, including the agricultural land, and just basically turning it into a militarized area that Israel can control. And now this is the same that they're doing here, going across the Gaza Strip. And among the structures that need to be demolished for them to complete this road and this buffer area is the Turkish-Palestinian Friendship Hospital, which was shut down in November due to an Israeli siege that cut off fuel. So they might be demolishing a hospital in Gaza. And this was Gaza's only cancer hospital that shut down. It was very early on. It was like November 1st or 2nd that they said they had to shut it down. And the construction will also require the demolition of Al-Aqsa University, several villages, amusement parks, and agricultural land. Israeli soldiers said that the purpose of the road was to make it easier to launch incursions into other parts of Gaza, and it could also prevent the movement of Palestinians from the south to the north. The Wall Street Journal also reported on this highway and said that it would effectively create a militarized belt across Gaza that will help prevent the 1 million Palestinians who fled the north from returning to their homes. So that's how the Wall Street Journal reported this. And Israeli officials said that the road will be patrolled until Israel's military operations are complete. And these Israeli officials said that it could take years, the current operations in Gaza. These Israeli officials also claimed that they do not seek to occupy the Gaza Strip, but they said they want to maintain security control within Gaza indefinitely. So, that requires a military occupation. And Israeli government ministers have also not been shy about their desire to occupy, reestablish Jewish settlements in Gaza and kick out the Palestinians. Now, going back to that intelligence document that leaked in October, one of the first indications that the Israeli government was thinking about expelling all the Palestinians, that document said that the ideal scenario is to kick out all the Palestinians, all 2.3 million of them, into Egypt. And it said they should start this by, basically conquering northern Gaza first. That was the plan there. Now, there are still some Palestinians in the north, but it's been completely decimated. And you do have the reports of Hamas popping back up there and reestablishing itself. But, this road, that so-called buffer zone around the border, it just shows what Israel's long-term plans really are here. All right, so the next one here, the U.S. vetoes another Gaza ceasefire resolution at the UN. So the U.S. on Tuesday vetoed a resolution at the UN Security Council that called for a humanitarian ceasefire in Gaza, and this marked the third time that the U.S. used its veto power on the council to block a call for an end to the Israeli slaughter of Palestinians. The U.S. was the only member to vote against the resolution, which was introduced by Algeria. The UK abstained, and all 13 other members voted in favor of the measure. So only the U.S. voted against it. The British abstained. And U.S. Ambassador to the UN, Linda Thomas Greenfield, slammed the Algerian effort after the vote. So she really, had some harsh words for this effort at calling for a ceasefire, calling for peace. She said, quote, "Proceedings with a vote today was wishful and irresponsible, and so while we cannot support a resolution that would put sensitive negotiations in jeopardy, we look forward to engaging on a text that we believe will address so many of the concerns we all share," end quote. And I saw a clip going around of her saying that the U.S. was working for a final solution in Gaza, which was probably not the best term for her to use. But Thomas Greenfield, she claimed that this resolution would disrupt U.S. efforts to push for a hostage deal, but there's no sign right now that any progress is being made. You just had Qatar's prime minister say that the negotiations are not very promising, and Israel declined to attend the last round of in-person talks with U.S., Qatari, and Egyptian officials. I saw Brett McGurk, who is Biden's top Middle East official on the National Security Council. He's headed to the region, and he's going to visit Egypt and Israel to talk hostage deal, but who knows if that means any progress is being made. So the U.S. is also drafting its own resolution that calls for a temporary ceasefire if Hamas releases hostages, which is essentially Israel's position, and the U.S. resolution leaves open the possibility of Israel restarting military operations after the truce. So over 4 months of this, and over 29,000 Palestinians killed, 2/3 of them being women and children, the U.S. is still saying no peace, no to the ceasefire, and backing the Israelis with military support and political cover. All right, so the next one here, Israel further limits aid into Gaza, leading to more starving children. This is from Kyle Anzalone at the Libertarian Institute. So over the past 2 weeks, Israeli actions have severely limited aid agencies' ability to distribute aid in Gaza. The situation is particularly grim in the northern half of the Strip, where aid deliveries have been halted for 3 weeks. 1 in 6 children are suffering from acute malnutrition in the north. The Associated Press reported on Tuesday that entry of aid trucks into the besieged territory has sharply declined by more than half in the past 2 weeks, according to UN figures. Israeli failure to ensure the safety of aid shipments is contributing to the decline in deliveries. Aid shipments into Gaza were also significantly reduced from levels before October 7th. One problem is Israel's inspection regime for the trucks. They keep adding new restrictions, and then if they find something that they say shouldn't go in, then the whole truck can't go in. And you also have the Israelis that are protesting near the border crossing with Gaza against the aid. But the situation is really desperate, and there's apparently children are eating things like chicken feed and grass and weeds. I've seen videos of little kids eating leaves off the ground. So just really horrific stuff that, I couldn't imagine going through having young kids having to deal with all that. And there's reports, I've been seeing here and there reports of, one child starving to death here, one child starving to death there. So it's starting, children are starving to death. It's not clear what the scale of it is yet, but as long as this thing goes on, there's going to be more and more of that. All right, so the next one here, settlers burn through West Bank village under Israeli army protection. This article is from The Cradle about some of the violence that's going on in the West Bank. Israeli settlers rampaged through the occupied West Bank village of Barqa, northwest of Nablus, on the evening of February 19th, attacking homes and destroying vehicles under the protection and coordination of the Israeli military. Settlers threw Molotov cocktails at several Palestinian homes as Israeli troops shut down all main roads to the village. Palestinian news agency Wafa reported that Israeli troops did nothing to stop the colonists' attack, adding that Israeli forces used large amounts of tear gas and prevented ambulances from reaching the wounded. Earlier on Monday, Israeli settlers, with the help of troops, fenced off a tract of Palestinian-owned land south of Jerusalem with barbed wire to occupy it. Settler violence against Palestinians in the occupied West Bank has surged to all-time highs under Netanyahu's government, and it escalated even further after October 7th. of course, and Palestinians have been subject to increasing levels of forced displacement since the war began. Since October, over 1,000 people, including hundreds of children, have been forced by settlers and the Israeli army soldiers to abandon their homes. That's according to UN numbers. Additionally, more settlers are being armed. Thousands of weapons have been handed out to settlers in the occupied West Bank under an initiative sponsored by the Israeli National Security Ministry. And that is not a surprise because the Israeli Minister of National Security is Itamar Ben-Gvir, who is a settler himself and, wants to take over the whole West Bank. So according to an Israeli watchdog NGO, Peace Now, Israeli settlers established a record-breaking 26 outposts in the occupied West Bank in 2023. The report correlates the rise in unlawful settlement construction with the Jewish supremacist policies of the Israeli government. Israeli settlers in the occupied West Bank are illegal under international law. So this is one situation, and, it really has spiked the violence in the West Bank after October 7th, but it also spiked before that when this new Netanyahu government came in at the end of 2022. It was like the last couple days of December 2022 that they took power, and they made a priority out of expanding settlements and with the ultimate goal of annexing the West Bank. That's what they said in their coalition statement. All right, so the next one here, Biden to impose major sanctions on Russia. President Biden on Tuesday said his administration would be announcing major sanctions on Russia over the death of Russian opposition figure Alexei Navalny. Biden told reporters before boarding Marine One on Tuesday, quote, "What I came to tell you was we'd be announcing sanctions on Russia. We'll have a major package announced on Friday," end quote. White House National Security Council spokesman John Kirby also said the U.S. would be announcing a major sanctions package on Friday. Kirby said the sanctions aim to, quote, "hold Russia accountable for what happened to Mr. Navalny and, quite frankly, for all of its actions over the course of this vicious and brutal war that has now raged on for 2 years," end quote. Kirby would not offer any details on the sanctions when he was asked, and it's unclear what steps the U.S. could take since it's already imposed so many sanctions on Russia. I don't know what else they could possibly do. The one thing that I mentioned is they have those frozen Russian central bank funds, $300 billion, and most of it's frozen in Europe. The U.S., I believe, has around $70 billion. So it's something they want to do is give that money to Ukraine. Now, as far as I understand, that's still kind of a long ways off. They're working out the details, and Europe isn't on board yet. But I guess one thing maybe the U.S. could do is give the money that they have, just this 70 or so billion that they have to Ukraine. And this is as they're struggling to get that new aid passed. That would be a pretty extreme step, but I wouldn't put it past Biden. But besides that, I don't know what they could actually do to hurt Russia anymore at this point. And the U.S., of course, has offered very sharp criticism over the death of Navalny, who died at 47 while serving a 19-year prison sentence. And the circumstances of his death are unclear, but of course that did not stop Biden from blaming it on Putin. And hawks in the U.S. are using his death to justify spending more on the Ukraine proxy war. And I just had to mention that, in contrast, the Biden administration had nothing to say about the death of Gonzalo Lira, who's an American who recently died in a Ukrainian prison. And he was locked up because of his political views, his views on the war. And the U.S. did nothing to help him. His father was very angry with the U.S. government, with the U.S. embassy in Kiev, basically saying they did nothing to get his son out of there. And then he eventually died. So, I haven't heard any, unless maybe, because I know like Tucker Carlson covered Lira, so maybe there is some Republican that might have mentioned him in Congress, but I haven't heard anybody talk about him that's in Congress. Let me know if you have heard somebody. But it just really is amazing how the propaganda works, that everybody's all outraged about Navalny, and you just don't hear anything about an American who died in a Ukrainian prison. All right, so the next one here, Lockheed Martin to increase production of HIMARS by 60%. So Lockheed Martin will increase its production of high-mobility artillery rocket systems, the HIMARS, by over 60% by the end of the year, as the rocket launchers have been in high demand since the U.S. started sending them to Ukraine. So the U.S. provided its first HIMARS to Ukraine in June 2022, and that was a big escalation of U.S. support at the time. HIMARS are mounted on trucks, making them easy to move and very portable, and they fire GPS-guided munitions. The U.S. has delivered a total of 39 of these HIMARS rocket systems to Ukraine, and several European countries, including Estonia, Latvia, and Poland, have placed orders for them for the HIMARS. So they're it's all working out for Lockheed Martin, and they produced 60 HIMARS launchers in 2023, which marked a 25% increase from 2022. This year, they aim to produce 96, so that's a pretty big jump from 60 to 96. And the U.S. Army is looking for them to produce at least 100 each year. So this is really just one example. The reason why I wanted to highlight this, earlier on in the Ukraine war, this is something I was kind of covering a lot, just the total boon this was for these weapons makers, for Lockheed Martin, Raytheon. Those are kind of the heavy hitters, but of course there's a lot of other companies. And another example is Lockheed Martin. They're very significantly increasing the production of Javelin anti-tank missiles. Those are the shoulder-fired anti-tank missiles. They started sending those to Ukraine under Trump. But of course, they sent a lot more since the Russian invasion. And those are jointly made with Raytheon, which of course is the former employer of Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin. He went from the board of Raytheon to the head of the Pentagon. And one example that I like to always use is the Stinger anti-aircraft missiles, shoulder-fired anti-aircraft missiles. They're kind of most infamously known for the CIA giving them to the Mujahideen in the 1980s when they were fighting the Soviet Union in Afghanistan. But the war in Ukraine has revived these Stinger missiles. They were out of production for 20 years, and now they're a hot item, and Raytheon is restarting production of them, and they had to call in retired engineers to help get these things made again. So again, it's just an example, and not just the war in Ukraine, of course, what's happening now in the Middle East, and as well as the buildup around China. I mean, that's a huge moneymaker for them already. All right, so the next one here, the British High Court hears Assange's request for appeal. So this article is from The Dissenter by Mohammed El-Mazi. This is Kevin Gostola's, I hope I pronounced his name right, Kevin Gostola. It's his website. He covers the Assange stuff very well, and whistleblower stuff in general. But it's kind of a summary of the hearing, the first day of Assange's appeal hearing, which was the defense. So the judges heard from the defense, and this is a good summary of it. So the defense argued the following. Number one, the U.S.-UK extradition treaty clearly prohibits extradition for political offenses. Number two, the offenses that Assange is prosecuted with, namely espionage, fall into the category of pure or self-evident political offenses. So that's something that the extradition treaty between the U.S. and the U.K. prohibits, is extradition for political offenses. And they're saying that what Assange is being prosecuted for is clearly political. Number three, it was an abuse of process for the U.S. to seek the extradition for Assange for political offenses. Number four, extraditing Assange in violation of the extradition treaty would result in detention, which is arbitrary, and in violation of Article 5 of the European Convention on Human Rights. Number five, extradition would represent a flagrant denial of his right to freedom of speech. Number six, allowing Assange to be prosecuted under the Espionage Act when no other journalist or publisher ever has been violates his Article 7 right to be prosecuted for acts which do not constitute offenses at the time of his actions. Number seven, Assange would not receive a fair trial in the U.S., and I think that's pretty clear that he wouldn't. And the defense lawyers also brought up new evidence that was not as part of the final appeal. So the decision to extradite Assange was made in January 2021, which is a long time ago, and over 3 years ago. I didn't realize it's been that long. But one huge piece of evidence that came out after that decision that the defense brought up on Tuesday was the Yahoo News report that said the CIA was planning, discussing the idea of kidnapping Assange from the Ecuadorian embassy in London or assassinating him. And this article from Yahoo News, cited a ton of sources in the CIA and from the Trump administration. It seemed like a very thorough report. So this is huge evidence. If they were talking about killing him, assassinating him, of course the case should be dismissed. I mean, it should be dismissed for a whole number of reasons, but something like this, I mean, this is a huge scandal. And hopefully, it could move the needle. And it essentially says that they decided to pursue the charges against Assange. Well, I'm not sure if it says it in this report, but it's pretty clear that they decided to pursue the charges against Assange after the Vault 7 release that WikiLeaks published, which revealed a lot about CIA surveillance, and it was very embarrassing for the CIA, and that really angered them. And this is during the Trump administration. The CIA was headed by Mike Pompeo at the time, who then became the Secretary of State. And they're pursuing these charges and what they're going after him for is not related to Vault 7. It's related to something else. So that's more evidence of political motivation. They're mad at him about this, so then they start this case. So obviously the defense has a very good, solid case, but it's all, political. And as I mentioned yesterday, one of the two judges is linked to MI6, has a history of working for them. So now Wednesday will be the U.S. Legal team. They're going to present their side of it. And so if the judge rules that there's any reason, there's a chance that the judge could rule that there is something to the appeal, and then they would schedule another hearing. If they rule that, against the appeal completely, then that's it. Then this is really his last shot at appealing this thing through the British courts. I know there's a European court I think they could try as kind of a last-ditch effort, but if they rule, against his appeal after this, that means he's probably going to get sent to the U.S. So hopefully all this stuff means something, all this evidence that they have to show that this is just politically motivated. And if he is extradited to the U.S. and convicted for doing journalism, it's just bad news for everybody. And of course, his health, bad news for Assange, bad news for Americans, bad news for people around the world. Because he's being extradited, he's being plucked out of another country. He's not even an American citizen. He's Australian. So lots of implications there for supposed U.S. allies like the UK and Australia. All right, so the next one here, the U.S. confirms that the Houthis struck 2 U.S.-owned cargo ships. So the U.S. military said on Tuesday that Yemen's Houthis struck 2 U.S. cargo ships a day earlier, confirming a statement made by the Yemeni group on the attacks. U.S. Central Command said that the Houthis fired 2 missiles at the Sea Champion, a Greek-flagged U.S.-owned grain carrier, causing minor damage. The command said that the ship continued to its destination of Aden, Yemen, which is not controlled by the Houthis. The Houthis also fired a drone at the Navis Fortuna, a Marshall Islands-flagged U.S.-owned bulk carrier. The attack also caused minor damage, and the command said that the vessel was able to continue its voyage to Italy. The day before this, I believe, was when the Houthis hit that British ship that they really did a lot of substantial damage. The Houthis said that they sank the ship. I haven't seen that confirmed, but the crew was evacuated. So, I mean, that means that it was, destroyed, or at least they had to abandon ship either for a fire or because it was sinking. CENTCOM also claimed that they struck a surface-to-air missile launcher in Yemen and a drone that was preparing to launch. So more airstrikes in Yemen. And the U.S. has been bombing Yemen almost every day, but it's clear this is showing us that the strikes have done nothing to deter the Houthis. It seems like their attacks are escalating and they're starting to hit more things. And then from Monday night into early Tuesday morning, CENTCOM said that the U.S. and allied warships downed 10 Houthi drones. And then you had the Houthi military spokesman say that Yemeni forces launched drones at U.S. warships, likely referring to that same incident. And of course, the Houthis, who are officially known as Ansar Allah, have made clear they will only stop their attacks on shipping once the Israeli onslaught in Gaza comes to an end. And if you remember, in January, President Biden was asked, do you think your bombing campaign against the Houthis is working? And he said, well, working in the sense that it's stopping them, then no, but they're going to continue anyway, was his answer, something like that. Just really insane. And this is just keeps escalating. And I mean, it's just about every day. Houthis hit something, U.S. bombs Yemen. They also just downed that American MQ-9 Reaper drone. So who knows what this could turn into as this goes on. All right, so the last story here, the U.S. may have killed 2 Cuban doctors in Somalia. So Al-Shabaab has said that a February 15th U.S. drone strike in southern Somalia that targeted the group killed 2 Cuban doctors who were being held hostage. And Cuba is trying to confirm this allegation. So U.S. Africa Command did not announce this strike, but they released a statement after the allegations about the two Cubans surfaced, saying that it was assessing the strike. An AFRICOM spokeswoman said, quote, "The command will continue to assess the results of this operation and will provide additional information as available," end quote. The doctors, Dr. Landy Rodriguez Hernandez and Dr. Acel Herrera Correa, were kidnapped. Carrera, I think I am pronouncing that wrong, but they were kidnapped by Al-Shabaab in Kenya back in 2019. Cuba's Minister of Public Health, Jose Angel Portal Miranda, said the Cuban government is in contact with their families and is looking to verify the claim. So the U.S. frequently launches drone strikes against Al-Shabaab in Somalia, but the war gets very little media coverage. Sometimes I'm the only one covering a U.S. drone strike in Somalia in English language media. I mean, that's how little attention this gets. And I'm doing it based off of a press release from AFRICOM. So, it's so hard to know what's happening on the ground there. And AFRICOM is known for undercounting civilian casualties. So earlier in the month, AFRICOM reported a drone strike that occurred on February 9th that it claims killed 2 Al-Shabaab fighters. And this is all in support of the U.S.-backed Mogadishu-based government, which has been fighting a ground campaign against Al-Shabaab. And the U.S. is stepping up military aid for the Somali government. I covered the U.S. and Somalia just signed a deal for the U.S. to build 5 new military bases for the Somali army. And I saw when I was writing this that project is going to cost the U.S. over $100 million. So a big increase in military aid for the Somali government. All right, so that is it for the news for today. Please go check out our Viewpoints, one from Kathy Kelly. Israel is assaulting hospitals in Gaza with full U.S. support. One from Ted Snyder. Biden knows Putin killed Alexei Navalny. One from Kathy Vogan. U.S. deceptions at the heart of Assange case. And one from Eric Margolis. Don't spare the billions. One from Daniel Larison. We didn't forget you, the U.S., to send 5 aircraft carriers to the Pacific. So please go check all of that out. You can follow antiwar.com on Instagram. Follow us on Twitter. And follow me on Twitter at @TheCampDave. Tell your friends about this show, about antiwar.com in general. Like and subscribe, all that stuff. Comment. I appreciate all the comments, all the feedback I've been getting lately. But I will be back tomorrow with some more news for you. Let's hope that we don't hear Assange is being extradited. But we'll see how it shakes out. But I'll talk to you tomorrow. Thanks for listening.